And here we are. We are live.
We are live. We are back finally. Are we starting from the tippy top?
We don't have to start from the tippy top.
I do want to go back just in case anybody missed anything. So last week
Do you want me to
we
hum
had
the
a
theme
really
song?
great.
I can hum the theme song.
No, that's
Okay.
okay. We had a really great guest host with us, Miss Penny Dreadful, Tara at Collinwood. Check her out. She has a wonderful episode up there, and it's dedicated to the Gold Key comic books. What is going on tonight? Who let Angelique at the switchboard? Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, we all hear you.
You can hear me? Can you hear me, Michael? Michael's frozen.
Can you hear us?
I can hear you loud and clear,
Okay.
baby.
Okay, that's better then. Okay. Oh my god. This has been a freaking nightmare, man. Yeah, really. Okay. So last week we had Penny Dreadful with us. Please check out her podcast, Terror at Collinwood. She has a wonderful new episode up. She was a wonderful guest host. We had a blast celebrating the 58th anniversary of the show. Just one day before the actual anniversary. So that was fun. It was a record breaking episode for us. We went 2 hours and 44 minutes. So that is we may want to consider breaking those episodes up in half going forward. But we could have talked for another 2.5 hours about DS. We didn't even get through half of what we wanted to. So check out Tara at Collinwood. She is amazing and lovely. Also check out Between the Shadows, another wonderful podcast, as well as Resident of Collinwood, and Dark Shadows Every Day. I mean, there's just so many wonderful casts and podcasts and blogs out there that are helping to keep Dark Shadows alive. We're all in this together. So, long live the shadows. I was asking Michael, I want to go back to that. Go back to what you've been watching in the show, because I know you went back now, you watched House of Dark Shadows yet again, because we have to recover that. So on our show. So bring us up to speed, Michael, and you can unmute yourself now.
So I have been watching when I am down and out, or if I'm in a bad mood or angry with somebody. I was saying that I always revert back to the black and white episodes when Barnabas is cranky Barnabas and rather demented Barnabas, because he's the apex predator on the block still. So Angelique hasn't showed up, Nicholas Blair, no Adam, no werewolf, no Count Patofi or Patofi. It's just Barnabas, and we've seen only Laura and Josette and maybe Sarah. So he's still very strong. Very not that he's not a strong character, but he's a different person. So whenever I'm in the mood to choke somebody, I watch those episodes because he gets away with that, baby. And I also like the fact that that Jonathan Frid was so nervous, and he piped that energy into the character. There's a lot of double entendre this evening. He piped all of that energy into the character, and he's more. His diction is stronger. His the way he carries himself is even a little bit more pronounced. And I think all that's great because it plays into the fact that he's just fresh out of in his own way the 18th century. So he's not acclimated to life where you can relax a little bit and speak a little slower or a little faster. And for me, that's what I see in the character. So I enjoy all those elements. So I've been watching. I watched the conversation between he and Jason McGuire about who is more self-righteous, and then I also like to go to the scene with he and Burke in the Blue Whale, where they're making all the thrusting and parrying jokes. I've been watching a lot of that and enjoying myself immensely.
More double entendre there. Yeah, I thrust. You parry. You parry. I thrust.
That's exactly right. Which reminds me of Grumpy Old Men. Note the double entendre. It's so It's so true. As an 8-year-old watching, you don't pick up on that. You actually think, it's just fencing talk. But now as an adult, you're like, ooh, like Madeline in History of the World. Do I have any holes that this band would fit? Whoa! One of those moments.
It's a
So
great scene. I know it was Jonathan's. It was one of his favorite scenes.
yeah, they did, and they played it very well. And he was still villainous enough, and that's another query I have. I'm sure it might make its way into the show about Burke tonight. Is that
Sure.
on the show? Is that on the
Anything,
docket?
anything, anything you want to bring up. We'll get into the War of the Burks at some point.
My thing was what happened to him? Was that Barnabas or sheer luck? That was my thing. That was my query. So
I always thought it was Barnabas. I
yeah,
always thought Barnabas made
especially
the
because they
plane
were
go down.
concentrating so hard. I in that at that point he was so they seemed to concentrate a lot more on him having beyond the normal realm of vampire power, like stuff that he was doing to Julia and all. It was they were always showing off that he could do a little bit more than you would expect, the disappearing and the hypnosis and all of that. He could do just a hair more, and I always thought so too. I can't see that it would be that lucky that he would crash in Brazil or in what's the name of that airport? Oh, Bellum.
Bellum, Bellum. Oh, she
So
covered that beautifully.
that's one of my favorites.
That place in
Because they're hysterical
Brazil.
anyway over Burke. So. Yeah.
And then it's like,
So
Bellums.
right, it's like she had you could probably see what was it, Clarice mouthing it to her from Bellum, Bellum. So yeah,
So yeah,
yep.
I think, but then
So
there's a moment where Barnabas almost he's talking to Julia, and he says like he's conveniently out of the way for the moment, or I don't know how long that will last. So that kind of leads you to believe, like, I don't know, were the writers trying to play tricks on us, the audience? Like, did Barnabas do it? Didn't he do it? Come here, baby. Aw. Oh, that's my baby girl. Say hello, Squeezy Wheezy. Say hello. She's a Dark Shadows fan too. Um, but I wondered about that. I wondered if, you know, were they trying to play tricks with the audience? And it was the oldest soap opera cliche in the book because one, Dan Curtis did not want to fire Mitch Ryan. He was in tears apparently the day that he had to do so. They took, I think, Anthony George on begrudgingly, and we'll get into that at another time. It's the Burke Devlin wars are almost like the Darren Stevens wars. who who played it better? And it's tough on an actor when you come into a role that's established. I mean, Burke Devlin had been on the show a year and a half at that point. So, but I think that's again, oh yeah, the plane crashed and there were no survivors, or so we think, because maybe it was like, well, maybe a year from now we can bring Burke Devlin back. We can bring Mitch back onto the show. So I think that's where they were going with the whole plane crash business to begin with. Just, well, we got to get the character off, and I don't know how Dan Curtis felt about Anthony George. I mean, he cast him as Jeremiah, so, but I think that would have been Mitch Ryan anyway had Mitch stayed with the show, and I would have loved to have seen Mitch Ryan and Jonathan Frid sparring because you would have seen real sparks. Your thoughts on that?
I have to agree. I have to agree. As far as you really felt with Anthony Burke's Jeremiah, you felt more sorry for him. I wouldn't have felt as sorry for Mitch Ryan as Jeremiah. It would have been more of a fight for me. And I would have for that reason felt more of the ire for Jeremiah that Barnabas, the rancor that he had for him in those early episodes. Had it been like you could feel that Mitch Ryan would have been able to push those buttons a little harder. Whereas this Jeremiah, you when you saw it played out, you're like, oh, I feel so sorry for you. He really didn't do anything wrong. He's such a sweet guy. Whereas like Mitch Ryan, I hesitate. I don't like to use the word man's man because it really what does it mean? But he has that a very masculine kind of alpha male thing going, and I think in everything I've ever seen him in. And I would love to. It would have just contributed more to that ire. To me,
We have a
it would have
comment
been fun.
from Adana. Adana, who hasn't missed an episode. Hello, hello, hello.
Hey, Dana.
She agrees. She also thinks Barnabas made the plane go down. In an earlier episode, he made reference to Burke disappearing into thin air.
That is correct. Again, that's why I think that the writers might have been playing, some head games with the audiences. Did he or did it? We're not quite sure, but I always assumed that Barnabas did make the plane go down. So I'm with you on that. But then again, maybe he's playing head games with Julia and Willie, trying to throw them off the track because, Julia is so determined that there's not going to be any more bloodshed. You do have to give it. Somebody went after Julia recently, and I thought, this woman is caught between a rock and a hard place in terms of she's trying to save Maggie. She's kind of dedicated to Maggie as a patient, but now she's found this creature that she's always kind of wanted to delve into this idea of life, you know, death being a continuance of life, as she puts it. And so she's trying to be all things to all people. But she truly, I mean, she says several times, "I'll do anything as long as it doesn't mean sacrificing a human life." Um, so she's, I think sometimes Julia gets a bad rap. She is not the one who injects Dr. Woodard, even though she put the serum together. She really is caught between a rock and a hard place. Just going back to that scene you mentioned earlier between Dennis Patrick, that's one of my favorites. Which one of us is more self-righteous than the other? I love that scene. So well written, so beautifully played, and I wish that Frid and Patrick had more of those because they really bounced well off of each other. That was a tennis match. That was a great tennis match between the two of them. Dennis Patrick had mentioned, for those of you who might have got zonked out earlier in the stream, he had played, if not the first vampire, one of the very first vampires on live television. It was either Matinee Playhouse or Playhouse 90 or one of those. You can look it up online. The episode is called Now You See Him, ... now you don't. And he explained, rather than using a bat, they wanted to use a cat as his shape-shifting. And he was to go into the ingenue's bedroom as a cat. And he said, we did this live. I mean, even more live than Dark Shadows, no stopping. The girl got into bed. They placed catnip near her neck. The trainer let the cat go. The cat went whoop right onto the bed, over by her neck. The camera cuts up, and he's like, there I am standing next to her live on television. And this is like in 1991. He's saying, now it would take them 5 days to film that scene if they were going to do that, for a television show. If anyone has any leads on that, I would love to find. It's either Playhouse 90 or Matinee Playhouse, because I know some of them are out there. More of those things, but you were mentioning that he almost always plays the heavy. There's also a clip of him singing. He had a beautiful voice, but seeing as how he was a true Irishman, he did some musical scene in some live television show, and you can watch that on YouTube as well. But any thoughts on Mr. Patrick?
Let's see here. I really he's one of those guys because he was so good in Dark Shadows. I remember being a little boy and recognizing him in the billions of other television series that he was on. He was always popping up as the bad guy. They did do well, and again, like the Mitch Ryan thing, I think that, and I don't mean anything against any of the other actors that Jonathan Frid played against. First of all, I thought it was a great at points. It tickles me that it seems like a pissing contest over Willie, who has Willie's loyalty more, and then you start to see shades of something really nice where you honestly get the impression that despite how smarmy McGuire is, that he's really interested in saving Willie, and he takes him to Collinwood. And how many of us have had friends that got involved with substance abuse or alcoholism, and you're trying to pull them out of it, and you're explaining to everybody around you, we'll get him out of this. He'll be out soon. You're doing everything you can to save. It reminds you of something like that, but it starts to give the impression that it's spinning out of like he doesn't understand why he can't get control of somebody he's always been able to control, like a genuine worry for Willie. So that's very sweet. And then he turns it immediately off to he sees the the infamous family jewels, and the greed pops up, and and it's almost Hitchcock like, the suspense you get when he's telling Willie he wants, and Barnabas is about to wake up. It's like the whole Carolyn thing when Julia's trying to get her the hell out of the basement before it's too late, and Willie's doing the same thing. But back to what you said, Willie and Jonathan Frid and Dennis Mr. Patrick had a beautiful chemistry, and they were both serious, kind of heavy, like two heavies on the show. Like they're fighting for their ground. I'm sorry, this is my ancestral home, and you start to see that shade of Barnabas. And also, I can't just let you in here like that. And then Patrick is like, "This is my cash cow. I've been working toward this my whole life." It's great. And it's also great to see Patrick step up his wardrobe too, as he's getting more money and more money and more money. See how excited he is. McGuire's wearing better jackets and suits and all that's fun too. So it's great. It's great. Those early episodes were a good time.
Yeah, I love the black and white episodes. I really do love black and white episodes. And one of the, I'm trying to remember who it was. Not Nick Besnick. Oh, what was his name? It was my first festival. Who was there? I think it was Violet Wells. I think Violet Wells, who was one of the writers on the show. And then the gentleman who played, what's the character's name? Is it Larry Chase? I think it's in Parallel Time. Sometimes Leviathans in Parallel Time kind of. Anyway, he worked behind the scenes on the show and then in front of the camera.
Larry Chase was a lawyer for the Collins family and Cyrus Longworth in 1970 Parallel Time.
But the actor's name?
By the way, he was also Chris Collins. The actor's name is.
I think the guy I'm thinking of is Ken McEwen. I think Ken McEwen was someone who worked behind the scenes on the show. I've got a
Ken McEwen.
Ken McEwen,
who was also an associate producer on the show.
That's it. So Ken asked the audience, they said, which did you prefer it in? Which did you think it worked better in? Black and white or color? And the audience was split down the middle. It was a 50-50, as to what do you think? And definitely those black and white episodes, it comes off like an old Universal horror movie. I mean, the way the set looks, it's very reminiscent to me of almost of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. A little bit when I see that set. It's to me it's reminiscent of the old Universal, especially when it's kinescope in black and white. It has that kind of grainy quality to it, and it looks like an old horror film, and it just lends itself to it. So, but I thought that was interesting that, and even now there are debates about that on boards about what did you prefer, and I think it worked well in color. Cy Thomasoff was a great set designer. Again, the sets were another character. The sets were another character in the show. That drawing room was so distinct. The old house was so distinct. The coffin room was so distinct. Josette's bedroom, I think it was Richie Levantino, one of the studio kids, said when you went on to the set that Josette's bedroom was one of the most beautiful sets. All those blues and the red velvet comforter, the bedspread. He said it was one of the most beautiful sets, and it doesn't get enough credit for that. We've talked about that, though, Michael, how the sets are another part of the... Because a lot of people make fun of the sets, and I don't like that. I think Cy did a wonderful job. Yes, they shook, but they had to be practical. Some of them had to be moved really quickly for quick camera angles. I mean, I love your thoughts on this.
My first thought is, and I don't mean to sound Fraser Cranish, but people that don't like the that's obviously don't have much of a taste for live theater. For those of you like you and me who cut our teeth on stage and love to go see people working on stage, it feels like home. It doesn't feel like, I mean, it makes it more lifelike to me than, in other words, like I've said this before, growing up in Maryland, one of the 13, you have many versions of the old house. Not so much the great house, but the old house, and you have those graveyards there, and it feels grand, but not so grand that it feels too far away. In other words, I could go into any wooded area in Annapolis, Maryland, and feel like I'm in Collinwood, or like you guys in where you are right now. You could find and that makes the show more real and more homey. Whereas maybe the one in the revival, you didn't get that sense, and they lost that sense of character with the sets in the new show. In the revival, you didn't have the old house was obviously just another side of the great house. You had, I mean, it was bigger and it was grander, but that's all it was. I always thought that the give me those rickety Barnabas's rickety basement with the fat candles anytime over the fact that the revival old house, those stairs looked brand new. The railing looked like something you'd see in the 90s. There
Right.
wasn't anything that felt really truly old. It was just bigger and better. It was, I don't know, I'm 1,000% with you. It's like reading the Enterprise or the robot from they were part of the damn show. Like nobody wants to see that go. You gotta dig in. So not like that is insane to me.
I know I've
And I'm out.
mentioned I know I've mentioned on the show before buying several glass jars so that Peter can make his music box. Ask me how many blue candles I have purchased, and specific color blue candles, mind you. Recently, we went by a store that has the perfect blue candles. Oh,
Yes, that's true. But it's like this. I mean, it's how many of these do we have? I mean, I've got to have at least 8 or 9 onyx rings of varying proportions. Oh, this one looks better. This one looks better. That one looks more like we look at that. You've got that. The canes. We've got the various canes. So
wait, I've been left out of the Wolfies tonight.
you didn't bring your wolfie. John didn't bring his wolfie tonight. Uh,
Listen, one of my aunts had. Do you remember in the 70s and 80s? They had all of these. I forget what they were called. Home interior parties. That's what they were. And the ladies in my family were always at these stupid things. Anyway, my aunts had and my grandmother. They were little French. It was a little French girl and French boy, teenagers, but they were colonial looking. And one of the girl, Obvi, the painting was much smaller and oval. It was about that big, maybe 12 inches, but it looked just like Gisette.
Oh wow.
So when we would go, I was always in my grandmother's upstairs with my bamboo cane talking to this this stupid little home interior thing as though we're Josette,
Josette.
that kind of thing. So I get it. Yeah, we've all got that's my summer cane. So it's we're all addicted. We're nerds.
True.
Dark Shadows geeks and proud of it. And proud of it. Now, one of the things we're going through questions, and we'll again anything that comes to mind tonight. This is a potpourri. That's what this show is meant to be. But we'll get to a more solidified subject matter next week when we resume. We still have our House of Dark Shadows episode, which we're going to retape, guys. We have to tape that one. A lot of Michigas with that House of Dark Shadows episode having to do with
Hey, Eddie
Italy.
Lucas.
Eddie, my chat buddy, Eddie.
He loves the sets. They were very creative for the space they had.
Yeah, and you know what, Eddie? I'm trying to remember John and I talked about this. The set, oh God, I hope I get this right. Wasn't it like 100 feet long by 56 feet wide. I'm pretty sure that was the dimension of this set. It was 100 feet long by 56 feet wide, which meant they really didn't have a lot for cameras in the cables and all of that to run. It was so narrow. George DiCenzo said it was like working in a saltine cracker box. So when you walked in, if you're on this side, as soon as you would walk in, Collinwood was there permanently. It was always there on the left side. And then at the far end, pretty much always was the old house adjacent to it. So they were like kind of catty-cornered to each other. Whenever you see the cemetery and the mausoleum, they would put that direct, or the woods leading to the cemetery. That would be directly next to Collinwood. And you'll notice that sometimes when the camera pans over, if they're in the woods, sometimes you'll see the drawing room set off to the side if they go a little too far over. And then I guess the Blue Whale and the Evans Cottage would have been like on this side of the studio. Just to give you some idea, I've always wished that perhaps home movies might pop up, because I'm assuming Cy Thomasoff must have done home movies just so we would have something to reference. I would love to see like 8mm or 16mm, of what it was like to be on the set in full.
There's a great episode of Terror in Collinwood where Penny interviews the cameraman Robert Ciccone, I think, or Ciccone.
Yes.
And his nephew. And they have all of these behind-the-scenes photographs. One thing that stuck out with me was the living room set that they had to film in, so the drawing room set, was less than 200 square feet. So that isn't more than... that's a 20 by 20 room, right? Or is that no? That's a 10 by 20 room is 200 square feet.
Okay.
So not very big at all. And if you think about how big the couch was, let's say the couch was 5 feet. 5 feet on each side is 15 feet. So that's about right. 20 feet by 10 feet. 20 feet wide and then 10 feet deep for them to shoot. So yeah, great episode to check out on the Terror in Collinwood.
And I know they mentioned when they left 67th Street, and they went over to 53rd Street, one of the problems they thought was that the ceilings were going to be too low, and that they were going to have to cut the stained glass window. And luckily, they just made it fit. They just made it fit. Because they thought, oh, we're going to have to shrink and cut that stained glass window at the top of the foyer stairs. But it worked out.
Wow.
Cy worked it out. He worked it out.
Wow, that's amazing.
You know what? While we're on that subject...
We said last week...
Go ahead, Michael. Go ahead.
Watching the... I remember being not a little boy, going to see Search for Spock, and when they blew the Enterprise up, the audience was, you could hear a tear, you could hear a pin drop. The same thing when you watch the zombies destroy Collinwood. Even though you see the curtain drop that was holding all the rubble, part of your heart stops.
Yeah.
That's Collinwood. That's the great house. Falling to rubble at the hands of these zombies. So I can't believe the space that you guys just read. Those guys, I'm telling you, the show didn't get the credit it deserved to do what they did.
Not at all. No, not at all. It did not get the credit it deserves on so many levels. You look back now, they really missed out on. The reward is that how many other soap operas are being celebrated this way? Here we're coming up on the Remembrance Weekend, which we're heartbroken that we're not going to be there for that, for Laura's celebration of life and for Jonathan's centennial celebration. But I understand it's selling really well. Like Jonathan's event is sold out.
3,500 people.
3,500 people. There you go, folks. So Dark Shadows is not going anywhere. And if you can't get to Jonathan's event, for those of you who are watching, please go and be a part of Laura Parker's celebration of life on Friday.
Yeah.
It's free, and I'm sure it's going to, because it is free, I'm sure they're going to be inundated. So I would say get there early on Friday night to that Burbank Marriott to attend that event.
Because the adjacent room is going to be set up for the sale of items. What they've done is, because that's not going to be set up until the next morning, they have put a TV sets into that room, so people can actually watch it. If basically that's the overflow room if the ballroom is full,
Got it.
so you can still see everything that's happening on stage in the main ballroom. But yeah, please do go check it out. And it is, to echo Peter's point, it's breaking all of our hearts who are members of this show that none of us are able to be there. So um,
We want more events. Penny and I, we were talking about that last. We were all talking about that. We want more events, guys. So we got to push for that. We got to push for that. Getting together and celebrating the show because it's so much fun.
and we know that this show goes all around the world, and we're just a tiny little show. We know that Tara Collinwood goes, she mentioned over 20 different countries people have written her. So if you can't get to one of these events, get together with your friends. Put in the DVDs of the shows. Watch the shows together.
Yeah.
And introduce it to your kids. There's so many different things that can happen here. You wouldn't have known about the show if your family didn't support you as a little kid watching it.
Well, no, and also as I said, my godmother is one of the original. I ran home from school to watch the show. People, so that's how she knew I would be into it. But now this is a question that has come up since this is Shadow Queries, so to speak.
And when you're ready, Mr. Master Host,
yes.
I have a couple of questions whenever you're ready.
Oh yes. Well, this has come up on boards, and it's why was the show canceled? Jonathan Frid was fired. He wasn't fired. He blah, 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 blah. Okay. So I went back and I had to take a look at the Jonathan Frid documentary, which you need to watch. It's wonderful. Mary O'Leary did a beautiful job putting this documentary. I just wanted more. That was my only complaint. I wanted more of the documentary. But these are the facts. And I put some screenshots because I was getting into it with somebody on one of the boards. And I always try to play nice, but, no one likes to be accused of being a liar.
Right.
Jonathan was terminated by Dan Curtis because he refused to do a second movie. He came to them, MGM had made a lot of money. They were going to do a second movie, and Jonathan said, I don't want to do it. I don't like what you did with the first film. I didn't know it was going to be that violent. He really wasn't even aware, apparently, of the staking scene with Carolyn. He was concentrating on the stuff he was doing, so he didn't know visually how the film was going to look. So he was not really keen to do another movie. And basically, and thought that Barnabas, that the movie Barnabas was going to typecast him. Not so much the TV show Barnabas, but the movie Barnabas, which is not the same Barnabas. There's glimmers, there's flickers of the TV series Barnabas, but it's not the same thing. And Curtis basically said, well, then we'll just phase you out. And he gave him his walking papers. And it says termination. It says termination in a document. Why would you get rid of your cash cow, number one? I mean, I think they were both hard hats to a degree, but I really feel Curtis was the bigger hard hat of the two. Jonathan helped save the show. It was his, here's my baby again. There we go. Wheezy. Jonathan and that performance helped save the show. And it was like, to me, House of Dark Shadows, even though I enjoy it, it negates all of that. It negates all of the hard work that Jonathan and the writers did to give that character layers and to give the show layers. But he was, in fact, given termination. And then there was contractual legal stuff there, mumbo jumbo, so to speak. So he had to let him finish out his contract. And that's how Bromwell came into it. That's a myth. There's been a myth for years that don't do it. Don't do it, John. Don't do it. There has been a myth for years that Jonathan insisted he be given another character. That's not true. He was like gobsmacked when he found out he was going to be playing this new character. It was Dan Curtis like just digging deeper into the wounds and saying, great, you don't have to play Barnabas anymore. You don't have to be a vampire anymore. And he never wanted to stop playing Barnabas. He really wasn't so crazy about playing a vampire. And I think they could have met in the middle and maybe said, all right, Jonathan, like 2 months out of every year, you got to put the fangs on. And then we'll have Julia or Angelique cure you again. Meet us somewhere in the middle. And we'll make you human, but then somehow the curse has to revert somehow. I think that could have been maybe the compromise they would have come to. But Curtis seemed to be such a real scungerer, a gabadost about it. Please weigh in, Michael.
We can't hear you, fine sir.
There we go. I
There we
kept
go.
getting a pop-up right in front of my damn mic mute. Mic
Oh,
mute.
sorry.
So it is just, they do that. Producers and networks seem to know nothing about about what's going on in their series and the relationship to the fans. And I've heard that story on another show I love, and there was an episode that was literally a threat to the actor. Let him
Wow.
know I'm still a producer here, and we can replace you. And it would never have worked either. Um, but Jonathan Frid, I 100% agree with you that although I feel the same way about House of Dark Shadows that I do about the Depp movie. I have to watch them and make myself realize, and I'm grateful to you for this, that they are in a different universe, that they are
Mm,
parallel universes, or parallel timelines. They're not. That's not my Barnabas. And I think I read one time where Jonathan Frid said the something about the scene where he had beat uh, Willie with the cane. He said that the track that the movie would have had them on would have never. Willie and Barnabas became very close friends. That would never have been able to happen
right.
in the movie incarnation of Barnabas. Even, like, it would
Yeah.
have been a rare moment for him to be gentle with Willie. And nobody wants deep-dyed, snarling villainy. It's boring. It bores the shit out of you for a while. There's no dimension to a character like that. Like we mentioned last week about parallel time and Angelique. After a while, that gets old. So Jonathan Frid had his finger on the pulse. And again, the beauty about Dark Shadows was the fact that these people were monsters was secondary.
Yep.
I don't personally think if they had leaned too much toward the monstrous part that the show would have lasted, because your my grandmother would sit down to watch it with me. She started because of Joan Bennett, but then the monster thing kind of was like either here or there. But she would still watch it because it was a very human show. It
Yep.
just happens to be that they flipped it, and the anti-heroes were the good guys, and that you needed that kind of an element. And again, I'm going to echo something else you said. That's because they were all theater actors, and they
That's
could
right.
play archetype roles very well. And the whole thing,
We should point
yeah,
out.
I'm with you. If you,
We should point out the fact
I'm
that
done.
Jonathan was right. Jonathan said this character is too one note, too violent, and we have talked about this before. The ratings took a dip because parents were like, "Wait!" They took him to the movie, and they said, "You're watching this? You're running home from school to watch this?" So it took a while to get that audience back. I'd be curious. We'll do some research for the next episode. When did the ratings start to come back again? What was the storyline that parents started to watch with their kids again and give them permission to watch it alone? But he was absolutely right. And we've talked about him being the sympathetic vampire, and that him being the first of his kind. Penny points out a couple of interesting things about some dimensional vampires in the past, but he truly was the one in the mainstream in the modern era.
He set the high water mark.
Yeah, 100%. So you mentioned about how Jonathan Frid left the show and that he was indeed terminated, as were all the actors' contracts were terminated. I love the fact that you had the evidence, but the question,
But let me add this.
yes,
This had happened previously, right shortly after Jonathan joined the show, and the ratings had gone up, and they were on kilter. Malcolm Marmosteen, who was unceremoniously fired, apparently there was a personality conflict with Robert Costello, but they were going into a meeting, and Curtis said, and we're going to kill off Barnabas, and Malcolm was like, what? We're killing off Barnabas? Yeah, we're going to kill him off. That was always the bit. But Dan, that's why we have a show. Well, no, we got a ghost story. I got a really good ghost story we're going to do. And I guess apparently the way the meeting went down was he said this at the meeting, and ABC was like, you realize the only reason you have a show is because of Barnabas Collins and Jonathan Frid. So I think Malcolm tried to play mediator and was like, well, you know what, we could do Dan's ghost story in parallel and still keep Barnabas in the, we don't have to get rid of him. We could, and whatever happened to that ghost story, I don't think anybody even remembers. I have a feeling that was the house by the sea that Vicky finds, Seaview. I have a feeling that's what that was because it's around that same time frame, if I'm not mistaken. So there. And then he goes ahead and fires Jonathan. And a few weeks later, ABC decides to cancel Dark Shadows altogether because I think in their minds, they thought, without Jonathan Frid, we don't have a show.
right.
And that's not to denigrate David Selby or Lamar or any of them, but I think you could have given Jonathan periods of time off. If he had wanted a break from the show, maybe 8 weeks here, 10 weeks there, something like that, and
Sure.
that you could have done, but to have fired him from the show totally was a complete mistake. And I know that House of Dark Shadows made MGM a lot of money. It was one of the few movies that saved MGM from bankruptcy that year. But I think Dan Curtis sabotaged himself out of a movie franchise
Yeah,
by making the movie he made and doing what he did with it.
right.
He pissed off Frid, so Frid didn't want to make another movie. My idea, and I've been saving this for the movie episode itself, and I'm going to say it now anyway, is Stokes shouldn't have died. Grayson shouldn't have died. I think we needed a movie that was not unlike 1897, where Barnabas gets staked, and then all of a sudden, the real Barnabas Collins walks out of the shadows.
Oh, wow.
And that somehow there was a transference of entities,
Love that.
and that he didn't really die, that he did get cured.
I love that.
So it would have kept him like they would have thought, that stake is in his heart, and now, wait a minute, whoa, and it would have been just like the doppelganger scene in 1897,
Wow.
and they could have kept the franchise going. Thoughts on that? That's my idea
I
for
love that idea.
keeping the franchise going.
Love that idea. Love it. That's it.
But no, they had to stick to the gun. But no. Yeah, I agree. That would be awesome. Well, and it it's interesting what you said about, and of course, nothing against Mr. Selby or Laura Parker, God rest her soul, but it's true. The time period that he was locked in that coffin, after a while, you were antsy for Barnabas. Okay, he's been in the coffin long enough. Every episode opens with he's locked in the coffin. Can we get him unlocked from the coffin? There's something driving about that character that you don't really have with the well, although they could explore Quentin's sordid past a little bit, too, like the audio dramas. He was a spy, he was this, he was that. That would have been kind of cool
Yeah.
Sure.
to see some of that. But it looks like he just for the movie, Curtis went in guns a blazing, and he just wanted some kind of creepy, not even creepy, just bloody horror film that was really savage. It wasn't just bloody.
Yeah.
It was savage on a level really Dark Shadows wasn't. Dark Shadows was elegant and romantic, and it had shades of violence, but it wasn't a savage. series. Like there were like in the beginning when Barnabas was let out, you'd hear about all the animals disappearing. That was as far as they went. They didn't mention. I don't even think they. I think one time they mentioned that a cow had been exsanguinated or something, but they didn't go into too much details. You saw Willie's angst about having to go out, and that was enough. I have a feeling if Curtis would have had the ability, he would have had animals hanging upside down in the basement, all that kind of thing. And that's not what Dark Shadows, what most of us remember. And if you think about it, most of us that are fans that were dressing up like Barnabas or playing Angelique or whatever weren't attacking people. You were, if you got your friends to play, it was more or less like you were, we got to go back in time and save everybody, or I'm gonna stay sit at her grave and just waste away. And was nothing like we were hurting anybody, or it wasn't about the violence. It was about the elegance of the series and the characters. You lost that whole thing, and the,
Totally.
the fact that everybody dies in 10 minutes at the end
Sure.
of the movie. You've now removed Peter Cushing as the great vampire killer and made Jeff Clark. I just killed an island worth of vampires in 15 minutes with these weird arrows. I don't know. It was just a
Right.
crazy direction to take, I think.
Hey, so some of the questions we've been asked.
Yeah, give us the questions. I don't want to ignore those.
Now, I find it hard to believe that this is a person's real name, but we'll go with that. Clara Bell.
Clara Bell. Hello, Clara Bell.
Clara's question is, she had heard us talk about this on the previous episode, a few episodes back, perhaps.
Okay.
How did the idea come up for the series? She said, was it a writer who came up with it, or is it the Dan Curtis had it in the dream?
So, it if legend is true,
Yeah.
Dan Curtis had a dream about a beautiful young dark-haired girl.
He had a dream.
He had a dream. On her way to an estate, reading a letter how she had been hired to be a governess to a young boy, and she then gets to the mansion, and just as the doors opened up, he woke up.
Okay.
And that's his story. Now, I've got to dig a little deeper into this. Art Wallace, who wrote the Bible for the original show and a lot of the first episodes, there was no love lost between Dan and Art. I believe there was litigation on Art's part. When you watch the 1991 series, it says certain characters and storylines developed by Art Wallace. Art claimed that the dream was all apocryphal, that it had never happened. Dan always stuck to that story. Who knows? It certainly makes for good copy. I personally would like to believe that he really did have that dream, and then he was meeting with Leonard Goldberg, I believe. Pardon me, from ABC. And they were talking about a nighttime show, and he said, well, I had this idea, and that's how Dark Shadows came about. Was in this meeting. It was a happenstance thing, and Dan decided to, bring up this dream that he had had. So Art Wallace tried to discredit that. It could have just been bitter grapes on Art's part, and I think Dan didn't treat Art all that well. Again, I feel like I'm bashing Dan Curtis, and I don't mean to do that, because without Dan, we wouldn't have Dark Shadows. So I really am not trying to go, knocking Curtis around. But even Sam Hall said he was not terribly kind to the writers, of whom Art was the original one. So we don't know if it's apocryphal or not. I would like to believe that he really had that dream and that he went with it, but that Art basically came up with the bulk of the story. So
I remember that interview with Leonard Goldberg, and Leonard does say that he came to me, and he said Dan was a little man, but very, very powerful. And when Dan Curtis demanded a meeting, you took the meeting.
Right.
And he says in that meeting, he brings this up. And did he say, I'm going to interrupt you, Dan, hold on. What you're telling me is the plot to Jane Eyre. And he's like, Jane who? So like literally he had no point of reference.
And he said, is anyone doing it as a soap opera? And he said, no. He's like, well, then shut up and let me finish.
Don't interrupt me. Right. Um, okay. Next question. Now, this was asked two different ways. One person said, "How did Jonathan Frid get the role?" And the other person wanted to know, "Is there anything truth to the Burt Convy rumor?"
I feel like I'm being a hog here with the questions. All I know is that he was submitted. Frid was submitted with several other actors. I would love to know more about Burke Convy. I know that he was submitted for the part. I don't know if he screen tested. I'm assuming that he was one of the people that went in and read for the role. You know, Jonathan said, I didn't want it. It was all that story in and of itself, how he got the audition is like.
Tell that story.
Okay.
Please, I'm sorry.
Jonathan had been on the road with Ray Milland. I think they were doing Lost Weekend, if I'm not mistaken. I think that, or Hostile Witness.
Hostile
Witness, right. Which, funny enough, Ray Milland wound up bringing to Broadway in 1967. And then he was spending time in California and decided he was going to be a professor of theater, and told his agent, "Listen, don't submit me for anything. I'm not interested. I'm going to be moving to LA. So don't even bother calling me." And he was kind of lounging around LA, and he said, "Geez, I better get back to New York and start getting my store in order here and figuring all of this out." So he got to his apartment. He said, literally, I had dropped my bags. And this story never changed. Jonathan was not prone to exaggeration. He shot straight from the hip. Dropped his bags in the hallway, put the key in the door, and the phone rings. The phone rings, and he's like, what the? Goes in, leaves his bags in the hallway, which you could do in 1967. And lo and behold, it's his agent. And he's like, George, how are you? I'm fine. Well, I've got an audition. People, I told you, I'm not. Yeah, well, you're not leaving tomorrow. No, I'm not leaving tomorrow. But in a couple of weeks, that's my intent. He said, well, as long as you're going to be in town, maybe you could pick up a couple of extra bucks while you're here. So please just go on the audition. All right, what is it? Soap opera. Okay, what's it called? Dark Shadows. Never heard of it. What do they want me to do? A vampire. Oh, for God's sakes, wouldn't you know? So he said, I went in and he said, I got it, I think, essentially because I didn't want it. And I saw all these cadaverous guys. And, the real joke being that I out-cadavered all of them in terms of, whatever it was. But the thing was that Ron Sproat was one of the head writers. And they had been to Yale Drama School together. And Ron and Joe Caldwell and Malcolm had said, we want to do something more with this part. I think maybe they while they liked Laura, and Laura is a wonderful character, they wanted the vampire to be even more than the Phoenix had been. And Ron said, you want Jonathan. I know this guy. I saw him on stage at Yale. He's going to do something with the part. This is the guy you want. And apparently that's how he got it. Now, there's a wonderful gentleman by the name of Alan Shane. Him and his husband, Norman Sunshine, they have been married, 50, 60 years now.
At least 60, yeah.
They've written a wonderful book called Double Image. Alan was one of Dan Curtis's go-tos for casting. So when he got the photos, and Dan said that the picture I received was not even a headshot. He said, I liked it because he was on stage wearing a cape. And I thought, oh, he's got to play a vampire. He's wearing a cape. So he went to Alan Shane and said, what do you know about Jonathan Frid? He said, oh, he's a very fine Canadian Shakespearean actor. And Curtis was like, he really can act? He said, yes, I promise you, he really can act. So I think it was between Ron Sproat and Alan Shane's good word that Jonathan got the part. How far Burke Convy got into it, we'll never know. I would love to see that screen test if it exists.
And Norman and Alan have been together. It's 66 years this year.
There you go.
Um,
All I can picture is Convy as Paul Revere in Bewitched.
oh, sure enough.
Like it must have resembled that. You know, it sort of resembled that character a little bit. Well, that's
Speak.
similar to Karloff. Karloff
Sure.
was a bit actor, and then James Whale saw him in his best suit. He was wearing his best suit, thought he looked pretty snappy in the commissary, and James Whale said, "Have some coffee with me." And he chatted him up and gave him the role because he had that the same kind of thing. He said,
Interesting.
my opinion of that suit went right out the window."
Is it true that they did not use the word vampire for almost a year?
Mhm.
Really? What's the reason for that?
You want to feel that one, Michael?
I would say censors. The censors,
Censors?
was it them, or did they?
I've heard censors, and then
I don't know.
George DiCenzo said that it was they wanted to keep the mystique. So the first time we
Well,
hear
and they
it
didn't show the bites a lot either.
is Angelique to Ben. Have you ever heard the word vampire?
Wow.
Oh, I didn't realize it went on that long. This was right when he died, right?
Yep, yep.
When she wanted to
That's
destroy him, when she realized what she'd done.
that's it.
Wow, I didn't know it went on quite that long.
I
Damn.
think ABC was skittish about it. That they did say like, let's
Because of the
avoid
time
using the
it was
word
on, something
vampire.
about being prime time. By the way, that's some of the best scenes. Those are some when Barnabas dying, and she's frantically trying to keep him from dying. I love that whole dynamic because it's not just, I don't think it's just from fear. I think she honestly regrets having harmed him so so in such a way. But it's those are some of the best scenes there.
Agreed. Agreed. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, she really starts to get to show. Well, out the gate, I had said that to Lamar. The people that lasted on the show, that had the endurance, they were these newcomers like Lamar, who had this was her first professional gig. David Selby, but they clicked instantly. I mean, you would never know that these people had never done a television show. She would say, in going back and watching the first episode that she's on, she's like, I could see the sheer terror in my face of what am I doing? Am I doing it right? But yet the audience doesn't see it. The audience doesn't see it. And it was the same way with Frid. Whereas some of the other characters, I think, that didn't last too long, they didn't seem to. I think they couldn't adapt to that world. We'll leave them nameless, but I think the real big guns, as Curtis called them, they made a lasting impression right out the gate.
And it was Jonathan that gave Miss Parker the hint that got her in 'cause he wanted her, didn't he? And he whispered in her ear, "You know, you're a witch," or something along those lines, wasn't it?
Yeah, nobody had told her. Nobody. It was like you realize you're supposed to be a witch. So, oh, okay. And that's why she looked into the camera at the end of the scene and she said, I just did this kind of zing with my eyes. And that seemed to be what put it over the top. Yeah, yeah. But Jonathan, I think Jonathan did want her because she said he made her feel very relaxed.
Well, it kind of goes back to, I wanted to say this when and I forgot, when we were talking about his instinct about Barnabas in the film and butting heads with Curtis, that he was off to be a teacher. The man knew, a professor. He knew what he was doing with a lot of that, like wanting her in there, wanting to make sure that she knew that she was playing a witch to add dimension to her audition. That was some foresight, into
Sure.
castings. There was something about her that he was drawn to. He had a great deal of, I guess, the professor in him the whole time, and he did seem to steer things in a direction that they needed to be in, and I think that's pretty damn fascinating.
Our baby girl.
Yeah,
Wheezy, another Dark Shadows fan.
you know, Marie
George.
Wallace talks about the fact that a lot of people don't know that Jonathan went to grad school and his actual graduate degree is in directing from Yale. And so he had a real eye, to your point, for for uh, not only understanding stagecraft, but the dimensions of a character. And Jonathan directed Marie in a production of Keep Me Honest Here, Eleanor of Aquitaine,
The Lion in Winter.
The Lion in Winter, and obviously Marie played the lead. Um, but one of the things she said about Jonathan, he wasn't great about moving people around in terms of like uh, set placement, but what he was great at was character development and research and sending her a book to read on a biography on Eleanor of Aquitaine and understanding the period and making sure that the clothes were accurate. And so, yeah, I find it really interesting that you would bring that up. And I'd forgotten the fact that he had told her that she was a witch at the audition. Um,
No, she only knew that it was a period piece, and she was excited about that because she had done restoration theater.
yep.
So she said, "Oh, well, I can do that. I know. I love that." As a matter, I joked. She in her first book, Out of the Shadow of Angelique, in the
Angelique's Descent.
no, the companion,
Oh,
the piece that she wrote, and she said, I went into this business because I wanted to put on pretty dresses and pretend I was a princess. So when we first got together, I said, you wrote in your book you wanted to do this because you wanted to put on pretty dresses and be a princess, and I said, me too. Which she got a huge kick out of. Um, Going back to the movies for a minute, yes, there was supposed to be a sequel with Jonathan. That was the again with the firing and all of that stuff. It really was going to be a prequel because the working title was called Curse of Dark Shadows. It's never been confirmed. People are still trying to locate the fanzine. It was a Grayson fanzine. We talked about this last week with Penny. Grayson said it was going to be the Barnabas Angelique Josette love triangle and how Barnabas became a vampire. Now, what they were going to do, I don't know. Catherine had moved off to France. Um, she might have come back and played Josette. I know he wanted to use David Selby. Would it have been Jeremiah or would it have been Quentin? Maybe they would have just made it Quentin rather than Jeremiah. Um, would Kate Jackson have been rather than Vicky, it would have been Daphne being on trial for witchcraft? Or they might have made Daphne Josette. Kate would have been, if Catherine didn't want to come back to do the second movie. Who knows? But that was the alleged idea. And considering that it was supposed to be called Curse of Dark Shadows, it makes perfect sense.
interesting.
I would have loved to have seen that 1795 storyline on the big screen. I think it would have been perfect, absolutely perfect. And the real ball breaker in all of this is that Night of Dark Shadows, which we'll get into is not nearly as violent as House of Dark Shadows. There's a couple of bloody moments, but it's more psychological. It's much more psychological, and I think Jonathan would have been more on board with something like that. Also, been more on board with the Frank Langella idea of let's make the bites sensual. Just let me press my lips up to her neck like a passionate kiss. It didn't have to be all of this, canine and 30 quarts of blood. It could have been really, really effective.
Do you know, was The Night Stalker, the movie with the vampire, was that because to me that's what I think he wanted Barnabas to be, was like that guy's horribly violent, and they played a lot on his mega strength and all of that, and it's that's reminiscent to what he seemed to want Barnabas to be in the movie. But I 1,000% about Night of Dark Shadows. In fact, and I know we're going to get into this later on, I find that much creepier um, than the House of Dark Shadows, and a whole different kind of. I don't know if you like the people these modern witchcraft movies like Hereditary and The Witch, all of those. It has elements like those movies, and like you said, there was not a lot of. It was more like a almost a ghost witch story, and well, the end is extremely creepy. The very end is very off.
Yes.
So it's I agree with you there. They took a better direction, much better.
And he wanted Frid to die. I mean, Roger Davis said when they did that final scene, he pulled Roger Davis aside and said, "I want you to take that arrow and shove it as hard as you possibly can with all of your might." And Roger's like, "Okay, sure." So they do it and they finish the scene, and Jonathan was like, "What got into you? What really, Matt? You really, did a number on me." And Roger said, "I'm sorry, Jonathan, but he said, I really want you to let him have it." And it was almost like Curtis was getting his revenge on Frid for not, that his idea that he had originally for the series had gone south. And now he was going to finally get to do it. He was going to get the Marauder, he was going to get Count Dracula, and he was going to drive that stake into his heart. So I think there was a little, you know, psychological stuff going on there with Mr. Curtis. God love him. I feel like I'm bashing the man, and I don't mean to. I really don't. Because I know we wouldn't have Dark Shadows without him. But when I heard Roger Davis telling that story, and he told it several times at conventions, I was like, wow, man. I mean, that's rough.
Have you seen the I'm sure you have, the Academy of Television interview with Jonathan Frid?
Yes.
And he's a little older at that point. And he's not a little old, he's doing, but he mentions what his idea of horror is. The vampire thing and all didn't interest him because he found that boring. He said, "But what I find horror is someone telling a lie." He said that. He says when someone is lying to you, that's genuine. People lying to each other and making up these. And you could see he really feel he must have been a terribly ethical man in life. And you said he shot from the hip, so he must have been a tremendously moral person. But he brought that. That was the central thing with Barnabas was that he had to live the lie, not the biting. He didn't like the killing, the fact that he had to live the lie, and I think that's so much more interesting than. And I would like to take a poll one time just to see how many of us who love the show actually enjoy watching that horrible moment when blood is spurting out of Barnabas's chest. This character that you've loved all these years. I mean, I can't think of a single fan that's like, oh yeah, I love that scene. That was great, man. It was just, what's the uh, overdone, not grotesque. It was
Gratuitous.
just outlandish.
Gratuitous. Yep.
Blood going everywhere. And gratuitous. That's the word. I almost said grosero, like that's a Spanish word. But yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, which, yeah, and,
So,
and
and it
then,
is
then
a
he
shame.
almost
And because look
copies
at the
it.
look to your point about the prequel,
And then he almost copies it.
the look that and I don't know why I notice his look more than anybody. Is it Strack? Is that who Thayer David plays, Reverend Strack
Reverend Strack. Yep.
in Night of Dark Shadows?
Yep.
Eh, to your point about how interesting prequel would have been, his look is freaking nuts. That long hair, that long greasy hair, and his overall look and carriage. That could have been fun if they had if we could have seen them in that time period at the height of their power. That would have been awesome.
Yeah.
That would.
I agree. I agree. I would have loved a 1795 prequel movie. That would have been really, really cool. Again, and I wonder, would they have just started in the past? Would it have been the seance? Would Daphne have been would they have just been indulging in a party game and Daphne would have found herself back in 1795? Would it have been Elizabeth recalling the events of Barnabas? But as I said earlier, I just think killing Barnabas off is what stopped the franchise. We won't get into the Depp movie today, which someone said to me earlier on a board. I didn't have a chance to answer it. We were talking about the movies and so on and so forth. And they don't like the Depp movie, and they said, I'm sure you would agree with me on that. Not really. I mean, it's not the movie I wanted, but I take it for what it is. I put it in a box and I take it for what it is. I would have preferred a more straightforward Dark Shadows movie. I love the prologue. John mentioned that last week. The prologue is brilliant. And even Lamar said if they had kept in that vein all the way through, someone in the upper echelon of Dark Shadows fandom took a shot at her because what she said was they aced themselves out of something that could have been like the Harry Potter series. Now, I don't think she was saying to that degree. We all know the Harry Potter series was like, Louis Kablooey in terms of merchandise and this, that, and the other. But if they had gone a different route with the Depp movie, there could have been at least another 3 or 4 films after that. If they had gone in another direction.
She's right. I think that would have been a series of good if they'd taken it more, even to the Sleepy Hollow level. Like if Sleepy Hollow is a much creepier film and just been less, the look toned his look down a little bit because Depp could pull it off. He did pull in a lot of ways, and I love it. It's a tribute to Jonathan Frid. But to the Harry Potter thing, there is a character in Harry Potter that is briefly mentioned, and the character's name is Barnabas Cuff. Just saying.
Got by me.
I
Totally
mean,
got.
she dark. Yeah, there's when they are in. It's the one where Jim Broadbent is the teacher, and he has the kids over for a party, and he's showing Harry the portrait of the kids, the pictures of the kids that he's taught, who he's so proud of over his time at Hogwarts. He says such and such and such and such. And oh, there's Barnabas Huff. I have to think that, that's
Really?
a Dark Shadows nod. I mean, come on. Yeah, Barnabas Cuff. So, I
Wow.
mean, she might not have been. I don't know that it would have, but she also said it would have been great if Merchant Ivory um, had done Dark Shadows, and I know exactly what she means because they know their way around a period piece.
Agreed.
Merchant Ivory did, have their way. So, I think she was right. I think they would have really taken off, and if they'd only stuck the program, history does repeat itself. Tragically.
Yes. And there are a lot of people that appreciate the Depp movie for what it is, and like, okay, it's silly, it's this, it's that, but it's become part of the legacy, and it's obviously lower on the totem pole than anything else, but it is what it is, and we're still talking about Dark Shadows. Now, earlier on a board, this had come up, so I wanted to tackle it. That we had, will the real Vicky Winters please stand up? Because Alexandra left to have her baby. They brought in Betsy Durkin, very sweet lady who we got to meet several times at the festivals.
How to Dress Your Man.
How to Dress Your Man. That was her book that she had wrote and she was written and she was promoting. She was very sweet. And then Carolyn Groves comes in for 2 minutes when Barnabas has to do that quick side trip to 1796 to save her. But the person that Dan Curtis wanted apparently was Jacqueline Smith, who was dating / then married to Roger Davis at the time. And the stories are conflicting. So the first story I heard was that Jacqueline, he basically wanted her and said, you got the part. And that she felt she had only done modeling work. I'm pretty sure I'm on the right track here. that it was modeling work and not a lot of acting, and she was a little unsure of herself and didn't think she was up to it. Sam Hall recalled that she did audition and that Dan was not impressed with her reading. So we'd have to ask Miss Smith herself. I don't know who to believe. Um, but she would have been wonderful. She had that grace and elegance that Alexandra had, that wonderful naivete about her. So I think she would have been a great Victoria Winters. The other problem is you had Catherine Lee Scott, who had really cut her teeth, proved that she could be a very strong ingenue. And I think they kind of felt at that point it's Catherine's turn. And actually, I find that Catherine and Jacqueline are similar types, especially back in the day. Um, and that it was just kind of a no-brainer to, well, why don't we just let Maggie take over as governess? She's the object of Barnabas's affections. We've got the whole Josette thing going on. Let's just, you know, go with it. We can delve into this further going down the line, but I think Betsy's a sweet lady. I just don't think that she was the right person to take over. I don't think she was given much help in the way of direction. And of the two replacements, I think Carolyn Groves was closer to Alexandra than Betsy was. So, my thoughts.
I'm with you 100%. The whole way down. I think that, well, first of all, Miss Scott, she's a very strong actress. Everything I've seen her in, even when she's, and I mean, they did a number on Maggie and parallel time. I mean, she wasn't at all the Maggie from the diner, or the Maggie that had been locked up and all of that. So she proved she's another one that can prove that she could move very easily from situation to situation. And that whole when they were with the whole count, I always call it the countdown. When Quentin is the ghost and they all move into the old house and she's watching the kids and all of that. I mean, she does a great job, and you get involved with her. I think that Vicky had almost. I think if Alexandra would have stayed, they could have made it work. But I think that by the time she left, it had played itself kind of out, and I don't think that the two. What's the one that I keep picturing? What's the young lady? The name of the lady that was in bed when he was talking to her, and Julia's like, "Get away from her!" when she just came back from the or right before she goes. Maybe I'm confusing two parts. Samuel, don't blame me. But yeah, I don't think that. I think Victoria had played herself out. And I don't know if it was because of maybe sensing that Alexandra Moltke had gotten tired of playing the part or what, but Maggie was the way to go. Although Jacqueline Smith would have been cool. That would have been wild to see. And she has a very similar everything to being, because wasn't Alexandra a model
Yeah,
before she came into
yes.
Dark Shadows?
Yeah, yeah.
So they have that kind of same kind of deal. So that would have been kind of cool. That would have been interesting to see.
Yeah, I think she could have pulled it off. I would not have
God
minded
bless her.
seeing her as Victoria Winters. Yeah.
Mm-mm. No, I think she could do it.
Yeah, and they were always trying to woo Alexandra back, even towards the end. Leela Swift and she had stayed close, and Leela said she said Leela contacted her, and her thing was, I want to be possessed. I give me
Right.
something. I don't want to be the victim.
Right. I mean, she wasn't like Julia, who was a dynamic human being, who had her hands and her fingers in all the pies, and she wasn't like Stokes, who had this kind of wizardy sort of knowledge, lore, like a lore master. She was just kind of being bounced from one problem to another through the whole thing. So, although she was sort of different in the first year with Laura than she had become later on, she seemed so trapped in 1795 all of the time, and after a while, it was like you lost interest in whether she got hung or not. You were just interested in what Barnabas was doing, and all of that kind of thing. But it would have been, or in some capacity, as something I can see where she would want to be a monster. Ah,
Cut her teeth, good pun. Oh, okay.
uh,
So Francis has a question, and I'm asking this because I'm genuinely curious too. Is it true that Barnabas was not intended to be a long-term character, and one of the ideas floated was that he was going to marry Julia, and they were going to move to Asia, where that's where she was going to find a cure for his vampirism. Not
I don't
true.
think that. I think the Asian thing came in with Sam Hall. There's a thing on YouTube you can see where they wanted to resolve the show just for fans. So Sam Hall did a little suggestion about what happened to all of the characters.
Oh,
Him being
interesting.
temporary, I think that he was only supposed to be like 2 weeks, right? He was like Dr. Smith, supposed to be killed off after five
So
segments, and that was
just
going to
one
be the end of the
cycle.
character.
One cycle. 13
Wow.
weeks.
Yeah.
And then that is and
Don't even tease.
I know, and you can listen to Roger Davis narrate the article, but they truncated it. So you want to go online, someone uploaded it and read the full whatever happened. I think it's called Whatever Happened to Barnabas and Company is the name of the article. It's also the name of our friend. Do I have it? I didn't bring it down. No, I didn't bring that down today. Barnabas and Company by Craig Hamrick. But yeah, fans were like dying to know because they walk off into the camera, Barnabas and Julia, and that's it. We never see them again. And now we're in 1841 parallel time. So they were inundated with what happened to them. Come on, you got to tell us. And he wrote this, and it's much more detailed. For some reason, MPI Home Video, when they had Roger Davis record it, they edited it severely. So there's a lot of plot points in there that are missing from the narration. So listen to the narration, but you can also go online and Google Whatever Happened to Barnabas and Company by Sam Hall. It's 1972, I believe, is when that article came out, and it's great. It's great. I know Penny Dreadful says she doesn't take it as canon because it wasn't sanctioned by Dan Curtis, but there are some really interesting plot ideas in there. I think that Sam came up with, and yes, that Barnabas and Julia were going to get married. Next question.
From Lee Bosquez, uh, first time tuning in. Hello, Lee.
Hey Lee.
Lee's question is, and maybe you can answer this, Michael, because you've talked about this before. What modern day projects have people who created those projects acknowledged that Dark Shadows was an influence? They mentioned specifically shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Supernatural.
Oh, to be honest, I've never seen Supernatural to the chagrin of many of my friends, but I can tell you exactly that's the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina on Netflix. I had been in a conversation with one of the writers, and I said, "You guys have got to get somebody from Dark Shadows, either Laura Parker or David Selby or Mr. Lacey, on Sabrina because it is a pop culture send up. One right at the town doctor is Doc Fives." And his response to me was, there's an episode, if you watch, where the leader of the school, Father Blackwood, I think his name, he's a warlock. He hypnotizes the oldest aunt into marrying him, and by using this enchanted music box. That whole episode is lifted from the Barnabas, Josette, not Josette, Barnabas, Maggie Evans plotline. He lifted that whole thing and adapted it to Sabrina. And they did try to, or he did mention getting, I think, Laura Parker, trying to get her on the series, but the writers for some reason didn't do it. Um, I know that Anne Rice was a big fan of Dark Shadows, and don't get me going down that road because it has nothing to do with her. But I saw a documentary where they said they leapt right from Dracula to her creation and said they were the first sympathetic vampire. So we won't start that, but she was a huge Dark Shadows fan. There was something, I mean, the writer for Vampire Diaries is the one that's pursuing the possible reboot. It doesn't get the credit out loud that it deserves, but those shows were all heavily influenced. Buffy, I don't know much about Buffy. Um, I'm a big Fright Night fan, so I didn't really get into Buffy. Peter Vincent is my guy. But anyway,
Yeah.
as played by Roddy McDowall. but I don't. I'm sure somewhere in there, and there was something that wasn't. Oh, Fright Night the remake, the new one with Anton Yelchin. There's a scene when he's barricaded in his bedroom, and they're actually the mother comes in and goes, "Ooh, what's happening here? It looks like dark shadows." So it's out there, you know. It's Scissors Out. Have you ever seen the movie Running with Scissors?
Yes,
There's a scene where the
read that
mother
book.
is there's something wrong with her, and she's watching Dark Shadows on television in that scene in
Yep.
1795. So it doesn't get what it deserves, but they are out there, and they are influenced, and that's why we keep saying push for the show, push, push, push.
And then some of the other places where I know that it's been featured, Snooki and Gilmore Girls. She often sneaks away to watch, played by Melissa McCarthy, often sneaks away to watch episodes of Dark Shadows. Um, Somebody pointed out to me after last week's episode with our show in Arcanes that in Seinfeld, um, the wolfhead Kane makes an appearance in the episode where Kramer's arrested as a pimp.
That's right.
And then Lee Vasquez points out that in Supernatural, uh, there's two episodes where they're watching episodes of Dark Shadows. So, you know what? We'll try to pull up some more pop cultural references where Dark Shadows is mentioned.
30 something. I know they showed that at a convention. Not 30 something. What's the other one? With Corbin. Northern Exposure.
Oh, Northern Exposure, yeah.
They
Oh,
talk about
Corbin.
Maggie getting
There was some
kidnapped.
other series. Oh, I'm looking for it now. There was a show where the villain of the series was an elegantly dressed, wealthy man, and he had the Barnabas cane. Oh, American Horror Story.
Oh,
There
wow.
One
you
of the
go.
actors in American Horror Story, which I mean, come on, has the Barnabas. It was the tall actor who was married to Lee J. Cobb's daughter. Oh God, he was in the Salem's Lot 2002. He played the priest. Oh,
Oh
I love him
yes,
too.
yes, yes, yes. From
Babe.
Babe. From Babe. Cromwell.
James
Cromwell.
something or other.
James
James Cromwell.
Cromwell.
James Cromwell. He his character in American Horror Story has the Barnabas cane.
Well, we know that people are watching
Yeah.
because people are commenting. Mary Easley wants us to know that in 1970 there was a TV movie called Comedy Tonight. One of the sketches was called Strangest Shadows. It was a parody of DS, and it featured Jerry Lacey as a kindly old vampire, opposite a Angelique character played by Madeline Kahn,
That's right.
a witch he does not he knows to be his sister-in-law. Uh, King of Queens showed a couple of episodes at a Dark Shadows convention.
Correct.
Angel.
His
Uh,
friend wants to go to the Dark Shadows convention. He gets into a fight with his wife, I think. Is that it, Mary? I'm pretty sure that's it.
and Mary said Passions would often talk about when she would come back, had you been on a date with Barnabas Collins?
Oh, he hasn't gotten after Josette after 300 years. Yeah, that's Juliet. Juliet Mills comes in, and she's like, "Oh, I
There's
had
also
dinner with Barnabas Collins, and he still isn't over Josette."
And we have to remember that Fright Night and Love Bites was written by Malcolm Marmelstein.
Love Bites with Adam Ant. Watch it. It was a play that he turned into a movie, and they do a total nod to Jonathan with the hair, and it was a little screw you for the fact that he had been fired.
So that was
the
Malcolm
there's a
Marmelstein, right?
song called yeah, I think the album's called Book of Love, but the song is called Witchcraft. Book of Love, Witchcraft, and it's all about faith, witch in history, and one of the lyrics is you'll understand utterly amulet. Angelique takes Barnabas from Josette, and
That's
they
right.
play the
Oh
music box in the
wow.
background. It's a great song from the 90s.
That's right.
They mention Circe and Glaucus and all these historical figures. Then they get to her, and they mention Hagatha, and Andorra, Samantha, and all that. So it's a great song. So yeah, it's very present in culture.
And in the novelization of The Man from Uncle, they go to Collinsport, Maine, and there's carved into a tree, Barnabas loves Josette.
Same with Partridge Family.
Oh, is that right?
And they go and they go to a haunted house, and I think David's character says, oh my God, I feel like I'm in Barnabas Collins' house or something like that. So
Oh,
yeah,
one last thing from me. Ben 10, which is a very popular children's cartoon that my sons watched. There is a character on Ben 10, a villain who is a vampire who is drawn to look like and is indeed a Barnabas Collins. He's got
Wow.
the if you look it up online, you Google the image Ben 10 Barnabas Collins. The he looks like Barnabas in 70. He's got the big amulet, the black ring. I don't know if you can see it,
kind of. Yes.
but I mean that's a now character. He is drawn to look like Jonathan Frid as well as Scooby Doo. I mean, the
The
Great House
house.
is on the beginning Scooby Doo, and the vampire that has the cape and all. Like, so cool beans, babies.
Oh, that's
Well,
amazing.
we talked about that because where there should have been so many crossovers, and now, and this is a perhaps a bigger topic, but Penny and I went into Facebook message, and I said, "Shoot, I wish I could have asked you this question the other night, and I forgot." But we did at the conventions when I started taking over, and we did the little one act comedies. Um, we would cross them over. We had the Golden Girls, breaking down in Collinsport, so we had them meeting. I started to envision the show not like Depp and Burton, where it was satirical, but I think it would be fun if you had Dark Shadows as a situation comedy. So that's when I started writing those. That's how I approached it. I would love to see DS, and we had tender moments in it and stuff like that. But I loved doing the crossovers. So we had the Golden Girls, and then we had Bewitched, which I thought was a no brainer. It was the same network. As I said to Lamar, you were scaring the shit out of kids in the afternoon, so they needed Elizabeth Montgomery at night. Um, so we did that, which was a lot of fun, and we did Scooby Doo and Barnabas too, because I was like, talk about a missed opportunity.
Jinkies.
This was Velma, sitting to my right over here. This was Velma. I was Freddie.
You look great
with my blonde hair. But that was fun. That was a lot of fun where they could have and should have done that. What I brought up to Penny, and it just hit the airwaves late last night. A lot of estates are going to grant permission, including Miss Garland. Liza Minnelli has signed off on allowing them to use her mother's voice. I'm guessing for music, but also for speaking, for reading books, including The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. So they're going to use AI to use. James Dean's estate has agreed to it. I think Florence Olivier, and Judy, and one or two others.
Francis Albert.
Okay, there you go.
I think Vincent Price.
Vincent Price. So I'm wondering, I said, what if they could get the permission of each estate and give us a full-blown return to Collinwood. Jamieson Selby's was out of this world, loved it.
Brilliant.
But I would love to see if they could make it work right with the right nuances. Oh, Joan Bennett, Thayer David, Grayson Hall with AI doing a reunion.
Love that idea.
After the show went off the air.
Love it.
And Penny said, I'm a little queasy about things like that because if they can't get the nuances right, it could be a disaster. But it would be kind of fun if they. I would love that if they could
I'd
make it
love that
work.
too.
That would
I
be
would
the
love that.
event to end all events.
Yep.
You know, if they could play that like they did the when they read the audio drama out loud alive. I think you all were there for that, didn't you?
Yes. Yep.
You, you would gather quite a little horde of people if they could get that going again. I mean, I would definitely. And what a, you know, we want to keep these people that we love alive, you know, in some way. And they all had such distinct voices too. Joan Bennett and Thayer David and Barnabas. You know, Julia. You
You know, I will tell you that in my lifetime, in the certainly in the top 20 live events I've ever experienced, that is up there with one of the most remarkable. Everybody in that room, 3,000 people, shoulder to shoulder, packed in there, watching it live on stage and crying, especially when they announced that Victoria Winters was indeed her long lost daughter.
The reading of the will, yeah, the reading of the will, yep.
By the way, to close out the thing about crossovers where it's mentioned in other shows, Dan Curtis himself actually mentions Dark Shadows in Trilogy of Terror. One of the security guards gets in trouble because he's watching Dark Shadows, and that's 1969. So
yeah. So I would love that's I don't know how fans watching if they agree or not, but and that's not I didn't want to disparage because Jameson Selby, if you can listen to it for free on YouTube.
It's brilliant.
We saw it live. And then they went in and they recorded it. Return to Collinwood is a lovely. The only flaw is Jonathan's absence. I wish Jonathan had participated in that because it really would have been.
He didn't come back for a couple of years.
Yeah, he was. I think he was still out of fandom at that point. But that would have been the cherry on the cake. So I thought, but with AI, and they could lift the voices from 1971 directly, and have the actors sound the way they did then. Again, because I know Catherine Lee Scott is very, very big on misuse of AI. I'm not saying that. I'm not suggesting
we're
misuse.
We're talking about with permission.
With permission from each estate and them being paid what they need to be paid. But to do it and bring them all back for a drama, I think that would be great. That's just my personal wish. Great. That's just my
well, and then what could you expand it to? I mean, you could make sort of dream episodic things like we talked about Vincent Price, how marvelous it would have been to have him, cast in Dark Shadows. If I think Victoria Price did agree because I've heard him on several YouTube AI things. Vincent Price could indeed make an appearance in in a Dark Shadows episodic thing, or the potential, as long as people got treated properly, it would be amazing.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I want to get into I want to get into the Vincent Price thing. We'll get that into the next episode. Once again, the time has flown. We could go on and on and on. I want to thank everybody who tuned in tonight. Our faithful viewers who have watched. I'm sorry that we've had glitches. We're still trying to work out the kinks. So bear with us on that. Please like and subscribe on YouTube. It doesn't cost you anything and it helps us a lot. Leave good comments. Unless you didn't like it, then we live by the thumper rule. If you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. But definitely hit like and subscribe to the channel, please. So we will be back next week. And also stay tuned for our House of Dark Shadows review that we have to redo. Because we're going to go in and tape that one, just because of all of that that goes along with that. So there will be more episodes coming up, as well as a subsidiary of Dark Shad-Bros, and that's all I am at liberty to say at the moment. So stay tuned.
I don't even know what it is, people.
Stay tuned, and don't forget to grab your willy whacker.
Ouch!
Have a wonderful 4th of July weekend, and stay in the shadows. Thank you, everybody.
Oh.